Welcome everyone to our Uncommon Practices webinar. I'm real excited about today's presentation. I think you're going to get a tremendous amount of value out of it. Since I started Uncommon Practices about 10 years ago, I've had the privilege of meeting almost 1,000 private practitioners and hearing their journey, their story, their successes, their struggles. Today's speaker happens to have, without a doubt, the most remarkable private practice story of anyone I've talked to in the last 10 years. And so I'm real excited that he was willing to share his story with everyone today. We're not selling anything. This is not a sales pitch. This is just purely, we want you all to soak in the wisdom of today's speaker and hopefully be able to apply some of what he's learned and discovered along the way to creating your ideal practice. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Ken Urie, who is the founder and director of Mill Creek Family Services north of Seattle. And take it away, Ken.
Thanks, Joe. I appreciate the introduction and your words. And it's always just great to hang out with you too. Welcome, everyone. I'm so glad that you're all here. If you are here today, you might be someone who is in a solo private practice and you want to build that practice, grow that practice. Or you may be someone who already has a solo private practice, but you want to shift your business model to a group practice and add other clinicians. Or you may have already launched your group practice and you want to figure out how to take it to the next level. And in that process, take yourself to the next level, because I really feel like it's taking ourselves to the next level that is really the fun of the journey. We may do lots of things and we may accomplish a lot of things along the way in our practices, but I really think it is who we become along the way that really makes the difference for all of us, for private practice success and really life success. So I'm going to be telling you a little bit about my journey, my story along the way. And that story has been full of all sorts of doubt, all sorts of fear along the way, fears that you may have yourself. But really, at some point in the process, it really gave way to far more confidence and far more inspiration that I come to work with every day. And that's much more fun to be there. And that's happened as I practiced certain principles and considered things differently as I've made my way through this journey. As mental health clinicians, we know our clients want to grow and evolve, even when they're feeling stuck and overwhelmed. The same is true for us as small business owners. We're looking for ways to develop our practices and ourselves. It's in our very nature to grow. During our time together today, I'll be sharing with you my personal journey from being an employee to being self-employed to being an entrepreneur. You, of course, have your own story. But what I know is the same for both of us, is that there's always something within us that is far greater than any current challenge we face in our business. During my story today, you'll hear about how I went from what if this doesn't work to what if it does? 10 key lessons that I learned along the way. How Ralph Waldo Emerson and Henry David Thoreau provided me a code for private practice success. How I went from hell no to hell yes for exponential results. The 3 paradigm shifts that really moved my practice ahead to success. One essential element I found is required to increase growth while decreasing risk. And the importance of taking imperfect, massive action. This is a story about the growth of my practice with an exclusive peek into the inner dialogue that I had along the way. My self-talk that, maybe like yours, has often been riddled with the incessant question of, what if? What if my wife tells me a few months into her pregnancy with our first baby that she has a revelation that she needs to stop her 7-year work as a school psychologist and stay home and take care of that baby? You should know that my wife stopping her work meant that we'd be cutting our income by more than half. It left us with my high-meaning but low-paid social service job I'd been working for a decade. So I asked myself, what if I open up a private practice for additional income we'll need to live on? But I didn't know how to open up a private practice. I didn't take any business classes in college or graduate school. I confess that I didn't even know what the word invoice meant, since I grew up in a house that just called them bills. And my wife and I had plenty of bills at the time. I asked, what if clients don't come? What if it doesn't work? What if I'm scared? At that point, I met with a career consultant, and he told me that I wouldn't be able to support my wife and family doing a psychotherapy private practice. He said they just don't make enough, and that it could only work as a second income. He suggested I best consider looking for another line of work. And then I looked at several other employment options for a year and ultimately didn't get hired for any non-therapy job I pursued. I felt completely overwhelmed. At that point, I decided that it was time for me to face my fears of opening a private practice. I decided that I'd do that on top of my full-time agency work. I worked out a sublet agreement with a colleague who had a private practice in Mill Creek. My wife, Susan, reminds me that it was during that time that I read as many self-help books as I could get my hands on. And while the self-help genre had been looked down upon as merely pop psychology during my academic training, I found that these authors provided me something that my professors had failed to do, an actual roadmap to increasing my sense of self-confidence to create and enjoy the life and work experience of my dreams. I devoured everything I could find on the invisible side of creating success, a fulfilling and meaningful life in private practice. As corny as it sounds, I read Awaken the Giant Within by Tony Robbins and wrote an outline of every chapter and reviewed it regularly. I stayed up late reading Wayne Dyer and Deepak Chopra, Mary Morrissey and Byron Katie, Catherine Ponder and Marianne Williamson, Eckhart Tolle, Thich Nhat Hanh, the Dalai Lama, Don Miguel Ruiz, and many, many others. It's important to note that it wasn't psychological texts about how to improve my therapy skills that I was poring over, nor was it a bunch of books on business development. While those certainly have their important place, it was evident to me that no amount of therapy knowledge or business knowledge was going to provide me the information and transformation that I needed to create a successful practice as long as I held on to self-limiting ideas. I was convinced that if I was going to develop a successful private practice, that I first needed to develop myself. I knew that any progress I would make would be doomed unless I changed my deeply ingrained thoughts about what was possible for me. One more book I studied during this time is How to Create Your Ideal Private Practice by Lynn Grodsky. In her book, Ms. Grodsky discusses why good therapists go broke and specific business strategies for success. She takes you through a step-by-step visioning process with an assignment to write down your specific vision for your private practice. She has you articulate the essence of who you are and what you have to offer. Some of her questions include, what's your purpose for creating a private practice? What will it look like? What will it feel like? Who will you see? Where will your referrals come from? What will you earn specifically? When will you work? What will your lifestyle be like? While it was tempting to skip over the detailed visioning homework aspect of the book and just get to the specific business strategies, I knew that this was the internal work that I needed. I recently dug out over a dozen pages of handwritten notes I took while studying this text. It was this experiential process, along with the metaphysical self-help principles and practices I was also studying, that set the firm foundation for the flourishing practice that unfolded ahead of me. I was grateful that I got enough clients that I could reduce my agency work slowly over the next 3 years as more clients called. But I was still holding on to my old job like a security blanket. After the birth of our second baby and the related need for more income, I thought about fully quitting my agency job and diving completely into private practice. Again, I asked myself, what if it doesn't work? What about losing my family's medical benefits? What about losing the dependable employee paycheck, no matter how small? What about that career consultant who said I'd never be able to support my family on a private practice income? But then I also began asking myself, what if it does work? This was a clear turning point for me. It was only after stopping my 12-year stint at agency work and fully committing to my dream that the phone calls came flooding into my practice. Henry David Thoreau, the author of Walden, encouraged me. If one advances confidently in the direction of his dreams and endeavors to live the life he has imagined, he will meet with a success unexpected in common hours. He will put some things behind, will pass an invisible boundary. New, universal, and more liberal laws will begin to establish themselves around and within him. Mill Creek Family Services grew. It flourished, and I celebrated. And I was grateful. But then, after a few years, there were more clients calling than I had room for in my schedule. I was working too much, and we had our third baby on the way. At that point, I read a practice building article in the Psychotherapy Networker by Joe Bavanese, who you know is a national leader of internet marketing for therapists and the director of a large and successful group practice. The article was about how to develop a money mindset, along with the clinical mindset most of us have already had for our therapy practices. I decided that I should try, as Joe suggested in the article, to give some of the referrals that were coming into my practice to other therapists wanting part-time subcontract work. I figured that if I went home at 5 or 6 p.m. to see my family, the other therapists could come into my office and see clients in the evenings and on Saturdays. I asked myself, what if I don't know how to hire contractors? What if nobody wants to work for me? And then I asked, what if I just give it a shot? I sent an email to several colleagues to see if they knew of anyone that would be interested. One therapist colleague I had only recently met emailed me back and said, hire me. She later told me about 2 other colleagues who would be interested too. It worked. It grew and it flourished, and I was grateful and I celebrated. But then I ran out of space in my office to accommodate all the sessions. It was tough to schedule. The amount of referrals coming in couldn't be contained by my current one-office setup. To my amazement, right at that time, 3 office suites adjacent to mine came available. And I asked myself, what if I pick up the additional small office next to mine so one of my contractors could see clients in there? But what if I can't afford that additional lease? And then this thought came. What if I picked up 2 additional offices in case I might want to hire another therapist? And then I asked myself, what if I can't afford that? And then I thought, what if I took the 2 additional offices, but didn't take the 3rd, and someone else came in and leased that office? Would I regret not leasing that one? How in the world would I afford going from 1 office to 4 offices? Where would the additional therapists come from? Where would the extra clients come from? How in the world would I be able to afford tripling my square footage for a lease? What if I don't know how to run a group practice? What if it doesn't work? At that point, I wasn't the only one actively toying with doubt. Nearly everyone I told about the idea said, "What? Expand during this economy?" Our nation, we all remember, at that point was still reeling in fear after the financial crash. But I asked myself, what if it works? And at that point, I began to learn, paradoxically, that leaping is often safer than staying put. So I took the plunge. I officially started a group practice in 2010. While up to that point, I had dated the idea, now I was walking down the aisle and getting married to it. I knew I would need to go the distance with this, that this was going to be a marathon rather than a sprint. So in order to show myself that I was up for all that it would take, I decided, right as I was launching my group practice, to train for and run my first marathon. I had become a true believer in as within, so without. So I wanted to get it deep in my belief system that I would be able to accomplish what I previously thought was simply impossible. Back at the office, I signed on the dotted line to go from 300 to 1,000 square feet. And this meant that I needed to furnish 3 additional offices and hire more therapists. I asked myself, what if I don't have any design education? What if I can't afford all of that furniture? But then I turned the question around and asked, what if I just take one step at a time and figure it out along the way? What if it works? I dug out that old Psychotherapy Networker article that I had intensely read and underlined. I found Joe's name at the end of the article and contacted him and asked him for help. As luck and good timing would have it, Joe told me that he was planning to conduct his very first online class regarding how to create a group practice in the spring, right after I was set to open my 3 new offices. I took the class and I studied and applied the material. I studied and applied, I studied and applied, I studied and applied. The learning curve was steep and dizzying. In the process, one of my contractors told me that she knew of a colleague, a friend named Carol, who would be interested in joining our group. I hired Carol and she quickly started building her caseload. A few months after starting, she was nearly full-time with MCFS on top of her full-time agency work. I'm not sure how she did it. And one day she stopped me in the hall and said, "I'm going to put all of my eggs in this basket." She intended to make MCFS her exclusive full-time work. With that, I had a growing sense that I really needed to take good care of that basket. And soon after, Carol's agency contract wasn't renewed, giving her a chance to let that go and free her schedule up to work only one full-time job. The new MCFS group practice was working. It was growing and it was flourishing. But with so much for me to do as a full-time therapist, scheduler, biller, marketer, and administrator, I found that things were dropping off the ends. I shared this trouble with some good friends, and they told me that I was creating the bottleneck for the growth of my practice, that I was keeping things stuck, and that I really needed to hire an assistant. But what if I can't afford that? What if I don't want to give up all these administrative tasks? What if an assistant wouldn't do it as well as I do? But what if my friend was right? What if I was creating the bottleneck for the growth of my practice? In my first lesson in the challenges and wonder of delegation, I found an assistant who said she was enthusiastic about working part-time for 20 hours a week. As you'd imagine, hiring my assistant made all the difference and was one of the most significant turning points I experienced in the growth of MCFS. Her work helped free me up to bring on more therapists. We grew and we flourished. We were grateful and we celebrated. But then we had so many referrals in our 4 offices that we started to have scheduling and space issues. The space that had just 2 years prior seemed overwhelmingly huge started feeling confined and restricted. I told the building manager about my space issues, and he suggested I build out the end of our 3rd floor of our building that had been vacant for years. I promptly said, "Hell no, I don't know how to do that." And it was a mess. It wasn't set up for therapy offices, and it was ugly with all the piping and drywall and insulation and building skeletons back there. And it was way too big. It would take us from 1,000 square feet to 3,000 square feet. It would triple the size of my space and the cost of my lease. Hell no. But soon after my vehement refusal to consider such a preposterous idea, I woke up one night in October 2011 and experienced a clear and surprising internal knowing. You know those times in your life when you become suddenly aware of something that is yours to do, even though it doesn't really make any sense at the time? This was one of those occasions. That night, I went from hell no to hell yes. I'm going to build out the end of the building. After lots of contract negotiations for the lease, a skill I needed to learn on the fly, I signed on another dotted line, committing to a huge long-term lease with a personal guarantee. In the process, I again asked myself, what if it doesn't work? What if I don't know how to build out the end of a building? What if I can't find more therapists that would want to join our group? What if I don't have enough clients for that much more space? My doubtful questions, however, this time were surpassed by a mysterious faith, surpassed by an inner knowing that had taken me by surprise in the middle of the night. I was strangely convinced that it would work, and that's what I went with. The vision that emerged was to create a beautiful new office for my assistant, a welcome lobby, a staff room, and 4 new therapist offices, one of which would also serve as a spacious and beautiful group room where we could gather as a team. But, of course, right on the tails of that vision came the questions. What if I don't know what I'm doing? What if I make mistakes with the design? What if it's too expensive to furnish that many spaces at one time? While these what-if questions certainly came, I also experienced a growing conviction that I don't want to miss this. And I encouraged myself to take one step at a time. In spite of feeling nauseous as I stared at the open space and mess and all that would be required to manifest such a vision. One step at a time, one step at a time. It was Thoreau who also said, "If you have built your castles in the air, your work need not be lost. That is where they should be. Now, put the foundations under them." And that was the process by which every inch of our build-out was transformed during our big expansion of 2012. Let's take a look at that. Here are some before-after photos of our reception area and how that looks today. This was some of the construction in a wide open, cavernous end of the building that we put studs up and drywall and paint, and that became our new lobby and additional therapy rooms. Another angle on that with the studs going up and the insulation, the drywall and paint. And that became our welcome lobby. This was going to be our staff room, I decided. It's pretty ugly to start with, but with a few shifts in the room, became our staff room. And then I needed to carve out a few different therapy spaces. So I needed to put tape on the floor to figure out where the offices would be, have the walls go up, insulation in, drywall and paint, and that was one of the offices that resulted. This was going to be a corner office that we carved out. And another angle on that same office from the window side. And that is Carol's office still today. The group room I mentioned, where we wanted to gather for trainings and as a team, started out as just one end of the building to the other. And you'll see the tape on the floor there where walls would be when I decided how big the spaces would be. So the walls went up. Paint on the walls, and that became our family room. Just another view on that. And that's just a really great space that we have to gather together and have lunches and have trainings and have the space we need to be together as a whole team. It was in the midst of planning that build out that another what if question came to me. What if I take my entire staff on a winter retreat to Leavenworth? It was during the first month of that build out that we took our first MCFS retreat to Leavenworth, a picturesque Bavarian style village 2 hours east of Mill Creek. That weekend, we really came together as a team in a new way. Here's a few shots. There's the snow you were asking about, Joe. And that's where we as a team went cross-country skiing. It was a great time for all of our therapists and administrative staff to bring their spouses as well. Back from our retreat, we had a great space to welcome several new therapists. The expansion worked, and it grew, and it flourished. We celebrated and we were grateful. But then it worked so well that oh, that's my wife and I still on the retreat. There we are. Now we're going back to work. Clients kept calling. And understandably, my office manager started feeling more than a little bit overwhelmed. The MCFS ship was beginning to tip with all of the work generated from the increased referrals. It became clear that we needed to bring on another assistant. And I asked myself, can we afford to do that? And then I wondered, can we afford not to do that? And the answer to that question was no. I thought about who we could get to help out. And I remembered that my niece had just graduated from college. I found out that she was living in her hometown with her parents and applying for work at Target and TJ Maxx. I thought I had a better offer for her. I talked to her, and after a good amount of initial resistance and considering what such a move would entail for her, she said yes. My niece's additional help in moving into full-time billing alongside my office manager helped us get back upright again for smoother sailing. And once we were upright, we took another staff retreat to Leavenworth. Here's a shot of our growing team. And my wife and I feeling happy and grateful. With more administrative support, we were in a good place to bring on more therapists in response to our growing client referrals. Over the next year, we enthusiastically welcomed several new therapists to our MCFS family. MCFS was definitely the place to be. We had a solid team of therapists and administrative staff. At that point, I asked myself the question, what if I actually made good on my long-term dream of attending the Psychotherapy Networker Conference in Washington, D.C.? And then the next question, what if I could take some of my MCFS staff along with me? At that point, 2 of my original therapists had each seen over 4,000 sessions since starting. I tamed my internal voice of that would be far too expensive with the bigger internal voice of go for it, you'll all love it. So I invited them all on the trip, and we had a great time. And my wife and my daughter came along as well. I even had a chance to meet Joe Bavanese in person for the first time since he was presenting at the conference. Back from the conference, I dug into a couple more books that I found to be essential. The E-Myth by Michael Gerber and Work the System by Sam Carpenter. The essential premise of the E-Myth is that it's a myth that a practitioner or technician, or in our case, a therapist, can easily go to being a small business owner. And he also encourages us to work on our business rather than exclusively in our business. It's essential reading for anyone building a practice. Work the System has a primary premise of the author having a successful business and then having that business fall apart, and him having an enlightenment experience where he was able to see every aspect of his business as a system where one thing connected to another in a way that he had never seen before. And he encourages us to see and break down every aspect of what happens in our business into these systems and processes and get them documented so anyone can follow these directions and do them. Both, I would say, and encourage for you to read if you want to build a successful private practice. MCFS was working. It was growing and it was flourishing. I was grateful and we celebrated. But then, you won't be surprised, we began to outgrow our big expansion. We had so many clients scheduled that we could no longer fit them into our 8 therapy offices that we just moved into 2 years prior. Again, we needed more space. I wondered, what if we move into that wing of suites on our floor that had been sitting essentially empty for 2 years? After overcoming significant resistance from our building manager to be allowed to see children in those offices, we started adding therapists to our new wing, one by one. Over that next year and a half, we occupied 11 additional office suites, as well as a kitchen. Previously, we had just washed our grapes in the bathroom sink. To celebrate, we went on our 3rd winter retreat to Leavenworth. One of our therapists asked another great what-if question. What if our MCFS team supports Seattle's annual suicide prevention walk? And that same therapist was the highest single fundraiser for the entire Seattle walk, with nearly $5,000 raised. Referrals came into our practice and continued to flow in, and our MCFS groove got even groovier, with the addition of several new therapists and a new administrative support assistant that could focus on scheduling. And with that kind of evidence expressed to all of my what-if questions, I now spend much less time on what if it doesn't work and much more on what if it does work? What if the gifts that life has in store for us are far beyond our wildest imagination? What if it works is just now the way I think about things for most things in my practice? That bold question helped us launch our first satellite office at the beginning of this year in Everett, Washington, where we have 3 full-time therapists. Our Everett location is a turn-of-the-century mansion that's been converted into professional offices that overlook the Puget Sound. One of our counseling offices is in the mansion's historic dining room, where we will host trainings, groups, and this year's annual Christmas party. Between both of our MCFS locations, we currently employ over 20 therapists, 7 administrative support staff, and have 24 counseling offices that serve over 420 clients every week. Just last week, we also expanded to the 2nd floor of our building with 4 new counseling suites. We are currently in what I call the empty space full of potential stage, where we have carpet, paint, and a recently signed 5-year lease. What I know is that new MCFS therapists and clients will be on their way to fill that space at the beginning of 2017. Here's a picture of our team at our recent monthly luncheon. These give us a chance to enjoy a catered lunch together regularly as we celebrate staff birthdays and work anniversaries. We have a great team. Mill Creek Family Services is a big idea where people who are hurting, scared, depressed, overwhelmed, and spiraling down in their lives and relationships can come for help. And when they come, their souls are quenched with our counselors listening, their understanding, their care, and their gentle guidance. Mill Creek Family Services is the big idea that enjoys a community of high-quality professionals working together in love and mutual support. It's a big idea that encourages an environment where we communicate to our clients an intentional sense of welcome, beauty, comfort, and order from their very first phone call, online experience, and arrival into our lobby. It's such a big idea that I've had much to learn along the way. These are some of my greatest lessons. I've learned to be inspired by asking, what if it does work, rather than scared by, what if it doesn't? I've learned to give up small ideas and comfortable thinking. I've learned to raise the bar and to give up settling for the height of any bar that's been set and reached along the way. The good that's shown up along the way must not get in the way of the even better. I've learned to give up doing things for myself and allow others who are ignited by this big idea to work and play in its energy. I've learned the power of daily gratitude for all that has been, all that is, and all that will be in my business. I've learned to develop new and unexpected skill sets required of me as this big idea has grown. I've learned to let go of my career dream of being a full-time therapist and step into a much larger dream that has much further reach. I've learned to embrace change and let go of systems, things, people, and previous decisions that simply don't fit anymore. I've learned to loosen my fears of the unknown, of not knowing what I'm doing, of personal failure, of public failure, of financial failure, of not being the right guy for the job, and my gut-wrenching previous fear of public speaking. And I've learned that the life and power in us is far bigger than any challenge that we face in our business. The author Richard Bach wisely reminds us, argue for our limitations, and sure enough, they are ours. Thinking about what's wrong, what's missing, our shortcomings, and sure enough, that is what shows up. On the other hand, nurturing a consciousness of gratitude that's been provided and sharpening our focus on all our strengths and resources, and that is what shows up. We always have the opportunity to play bigger in this life, to boldly ask, what if, and to expect the best results that we can imagine. Thank you for sharing my journey with me.
Thank you, Ken. That's phenomenal. People had some questions. Can I pass some questions on to you?
Sure, that's great. Yeah, I'd love to talk about this stuff.
Okay, I know.
Yeah.
One question someone asked was, how did you get so many referrals? You know, you started off just by yourself, and then you were able, it sounds like you filled up your own practice, and then just seemingly endless growth spurt. What's fueling that in terms of referrals?
Mm-hmm. Well, initially I had established myself at some level in the community by working at the agency, and I had several contacts in the area when I was starting my practice. And so that was sort of word of mouth that I was starting a private practice. And then as I started adding people, it really came through developing a website and having SEO, having the search engine optimization that you helped me with, Joe, essentially get people to recognize us and give us a call. And I really think that most referrals, it seems to me, that come to my practice at least, are coming from people who aren't necessarily, as it might have been years ago, who asked maybe a friend or a colleague or their doctor about who they might see for counseling, but they go to their phone or they go to their computer in their own private world and they type in depression, anxiety, couples counseling near Mill Creek, near whatever city that you might be in, and then they see our faces on our website, and we have an opportunity there to provide them some information about who we are. And instead of maybe a friend or a colleague giving them that information, they do their own personal research. So I find that the referrals really come mostly from online. I have advertised in online directories and have sort of a pervasive online presence in that way. And it's just getting our name and faces out there electronically in the world that we live in that I think is really most compelling to people. And I think they get really the most information because we can say quite a bit about who we are and what we provide. And then we have our community that can connect or not connect with your particular message that you have as a practice, who you are. If they connect with that, they want to call and they want to get services.
Okay, thanks. Several questions about your therapy staff, and I'll just one at a time. So first of all, where do you find good clinicians to work for your expanding staff?
That's a great question because I had a lot of fears about that. I wondered where I might find them. And as I mentioned, one of the first things I did was I essentially sent out an email to the people that I knew in my community, the colleagues I had, and say, hey, do you know anyone who might be interested in getting some additional part-time work on top of what they're doing to come in and get some additional contract work? And so the first person said, hire me. And after that, that person knew another person, and then that person knew a couple other people. So word of mouth started growing as they had a good experience here. And then, of course, there is we advertise on Craigslist. We have a hiring ad on that as well as Indeed, and we get lots of responses for that. And we get people essentially who know about us more and more in the community as become increasingly established. People know who we are now because of our growth over time. And people hear about us not just locally, but we essentially just recently got a couple therapists who've come in from Delaware. So, the nature of an online ad is people can access that from anywhere in the country.
Good. Yeah. Someone asked, why did you decide to hire therapists as associates of yours as opposed to just renting out space to them?
That's a great question because it was actually a question I had for myself as I was developing my business model for this. And I was tempted initially by some people who did say that they wanted to essentially rent some of the space that I had that was additional space that I hadn't filled yet. And I really thought about that because that could be some extra dollars in front of me in order to help pay for the space that I'd rented. But I was increasingly convinced of this idea and this vision that I had for this practice that I talked about that really had us building a group feeling, a community and culture where we could serve the community from this sort of centralized unit of Mill Creek Family Services, and someone renting space is really outside that. And so I gave up the essentially check that could potentially be written today for someone who wants to rent space and held on a little bit longer because of my belief in the idea to have the contractors at that time, which I later shifted to employees, because I really wanted that community and culture. And I also think as a business model financially, it just made a lot more sense long-term. I was sort of into the long-term gain rather than the short-term gain that would come from renting space. It was a dilemma that came up a few different times. I felt like it tested my resolve about not doing it. because it is so tempting. But for me, at least, I know that may be a good option for people. But for me, it was really important to essentially bring people on who were really a part of and wanted to be excited about what we were doing at Mill Creek Family Services.
Okay. Now, is Mill Creek in network for any insurance companies, or are you all out of network? How does that work?
Most of our providers, we have been able to credential and get paneled with most of the major insurance companies in our area. So we are in network with most. We have some providers because either they're new or something with the credentialing process where they're out of network. So we do have some people not on some panels, and so they can provide out of network therapy as well. And that actually has really helped with the model. Again, you could build a fee-for-service private practice, and that takes a different skill set and marketing skill set. I really, as part of my vision, I wanted to serve as many people in our community who were hurting and in need as possible. And I know that people in our community are people who often have insurance, especially when it's the law of the land now to have insurance. And so people want to use their insurance benefits, and I wanted to be in the mode of saying yes to people when they call. Yes, we can meet your need. Yes, we can maximize your insurance benefit, rather than not. Now, I know that some people don't want to deal with insurance companies, and that's fair. There are a lot of potential headaches that can come from dealing with insurance companies. There's difficulties, and they may pay low or pay late or deny things, and you have all the paperwork that goes along with that. And I guess those challenges for me were just something that I was willing to take on to support my bigger vision of being able to serve as many people as possible. Early in my practice, as it was developing, I would go to some trainings or therapist gatherings, and I would hear them complaining a lot about insurance companies and how much the reimbursement for managed care is going down. And it was like when these conversations happened in the lobby during training, like this dark cloud sort of came over the conversation. Everyone was weighed down by it. They were mad. They were resentful of them. And I just thought, this is not the sort of feeling tone in life that I want to be experiencing as the owner of a private practice. And I committed at that time that if I'm going to get on insurance panels, I am not going to be mad at them. Now, I can have frustrations along the way. I can have some times when things aren't working out, and it certainly has a rub for me. But when I find myself getting all worked up when that dark cloud comes in, I think one of the major things that we're selling as private practitioners or group practice owners is a sense of peace, a sense of calm, a sense of joy, a sense of being able to overcome any challenges in our life with the resources that we have. And if we can't embody that with dealing with like the challenge that comes with our particular business, I actually think that's out of integrity. The integrity that we would have is to be able to say, this is a challenge we have that fits into our model. And it's a challenge that will just be there, and we'll deal with it as effectively as we can to serve the greater need in our community. So that was my resolve. And it's really, that commitment to myself has really helped.
Great, thanks. Now, you talked quite a bit today, Ken, about this inner struggle between what if it doesn't work, what if it does work. I mean, what technique did you use to manage those negative, like did you use some cognitive therapy or self-talk, or how did you get past, because it sounds like you had a kind of steady stream of those negative fears.
Mm-hmm. I did, and I think I'm not alone in that. I certainly talked to other folks who have that. We either name them to ourselves or we don't name them. They're subconscious or they're conscious fears that we have. And I just think we all share them. I think when we have the what if question comes up first, it says that we're doing something bigger than we had previously done before. We're playing a bigger game. And it's actually an indicator, I remind myself, that I'm moving forward in life. Because if I wasn't having those what if questions, I'm probably staying way too comfortable. I'm not taking enough risks. So for me, when you say, I did some cognitive restructuring, I essentially would practice asking myself, well, once I sort of understood that I was asking myself the what if it doesn't work question, I became aware of that. I started practicing, well, what if it does work? And just sort of naming that to myself. And then, I think the three biggest things that really helped me essentially live in more of a sort of a solution or into possibility thinking is what I do every morning when I get to the athletic club, to my gym, to be able to work out in the morning, to be able to clear my mind of other things that are happening, to be able to work on my health and my body, again, as within, so without. If I get this system working well inside, I feel like it can essentially show up in my outer world. I get myself to my faith community on Sunday mornings, and that inspires me and helps me lean into a possibility that I'd maybe forgotten during the week. And then I'm able to get out of town on a regular basis, my wife and family and I, to go to our place over in Leavenworth. And it really is, I mean, it sounds sort of corny, it sounds sort of woo-woo, but I tell you, when we climb that mountain, the pass, and we see the beauty of the mountains, it's some of the best ideas I've had about my practice and the possibilities of what could work for me. They drop in during those times of inspiration. So I think my homework is really not, if the cognitive interventions don't work because I just can't think it through, I do more of a experiential work with my body, with my state, with my surroundings, so that I'm inspired by an idea. It was just at the beginning of 2013 that I had the idea that I would actually stop seeing clients on one ascension up the pass to the other side of the mountain, where it sort of dropped in as the idea, like, you've got to stop seeing clients if you're going to run this group practice. And I wasn't full of what if it doesn't work questions at that time, because I was in an inspired state. And when I have that, I think those are the ideas I'm going to run with. So books, support, ways to think about things differently. I think everyone has their own practices, but you must have a practice that essentially challenges and edges out those doubts and those fears if we're going to move forward. Any progress that we make forward in our practice that it just comes through efforting and work is going to be doomed, or certainly short-lived, unless we make those internal changes that will sustain that over time.
Hey, Ken, someone just said, I sure hope you're considering writing a book. You are phenomenal.
Oh, that's good.
Oh, what if it was a bestseller?
Yeah. What if? Yeah. Thank you.
Sure. Somebody said, where do you find support?
Well, it's interesting for me in this, as I have grown in my practice development. It's been important for me to maintain some colleagues, and I've actually started losing some colleagues in the way of, like, I didn't find anyone around here who was also running a group practice. I sort of moved myself out of being in the therapist community into being a business owner. So I had to find some other business owner colleagues, you, Joe, yourself, and some of the community that you've developed. It's been great to have other group practice owners that I've been able to get support from over time. Of course, that would be professional help and support, the people who can really get what I'm going through as a group practice owner, as well as just, the support of my family and my friends. And we have a supportive network here that we've developed in our practice and the culture that we've built. That is part of the culture that I want to have for everyone here, that we can come here and get the personal support and the professional support that we need.
Oh, someone wanted to know, you mentioned you moved from independent contractors to employees. And so why did you make that change, and how'd that go?
Right. That's a great question. I initially started with contractors, because I didn't know what I was doing. And Joe, you said to start with contractors. So, do what Joe says. It's a really good idea. Most all of them, you just follow his path and he gets you going in a good direction. So I did that, and that was working well. But the practice that I was growing, it just really had core ways of doing things. We had our systems increasingly centralized. We had our branding that was sort of recognizable as one single entity, that started looking a little bit more like I wasn't hiring these people who were doing their independent thing sort of beside me as a contractor would. And that's all legitimate to do that. But it was looking much more like we had this sort of centralized brand that I thought that when I looked through the 20-factor test, if you look online at the tests about what makes someone designated as a contractor or an employee, you go through those questions and answer those 20 questions. And it's not just like, There's one answer to one of them that makes your the people you employ as employees or contractors. You have to go through all of them. And those are the questions that I think the IRS would also go through if they are coming to look at your practice to say, well, do these people look like they're contractors or employees? For my practice, it seemed like the safest choice to move them to what my practice was really growing into, which was a business that was employing actual employees. And then with that, it's been kind of exciting to have that. I also draw people who are sort of the employee mindset versus the contractor mindset. That's worked well for me. Someone who wants to have some things taken care of. They have their taxes taken out for them in their paycheck. And we've set up a retirement plan for them where we do a 3% matching deal with them. So as much as I think the people who want to be in my organization are people who don't want to be for example, a community mental health organization anymore. For whatever reason, there's great work being done at those organizations, and maybe they feel like their tenure is done there, and they want to build a private practice, but they don't want to take all the risks that come from developing a private practice, and they're scared about doing that, and as well as all the billing issues and all the marketing issues that take a whole different skill set that we know. So I essentially draw those people who are already employees into this sort of employee model.
Okay. Yeah. And one more question. Someone want to know that a lot of your expansion cost a lot of money. Did you have like some sort of line of credit, or how did you fund all these expansions? Or was it just based on the income from all the sessions?
Yeah, that's a real issue. It was a little bit of both along the way. There was most everything that I have done, I have been able to fund with how the business has grown over time. The business has funded the expansions. And there was one time early, the big expansion of 2012 that you saw the pictures of, I got a line of credit from the bank, and they give those to you, and I knew I'd be good for it because I knew that this was going to work after I committed to the idea. So I got a line of credit. We moved into that line of credit for a bit in order to get things furnished and up and working. And then we paid that down as soon as we could so that we had that zeroed out. Fairly recently, I actually increased that line of credit because our payroll was so enormous at this point. I haven't dipped into it at all, but I'd like having that there in case I ever needed to. And that's always there and available. But most things, I'm just conservative with my financial approach. I think there are times when it's helpful to get funding from another source to help support a dream or an idea. I think we have to be careful with it. It has to be measured. And as much as we can do it on our own on the way by what's being produced by the business, that's terrific. And then you make decisions along the way to have the business be profitable enough to build reserves that can help tide you through any particular difficulty going forward if you don't have some therapists for a patch or client referrals go down for a while. Essentially, I think one of the best business building strategies is to build some reserves so that you can rest easy in that and you can go forward with confidence.
Wonderful. All right, Ken, looks like we're at the top of the hour, and I know some people have some sessions, so we want to respect everyone's time.
Yeah.
So thank you so much. This was phenomenal. And everyone who's on the call, I'll be sending out an email with a recording of Ken's presentation. Would you be able to supply a PDF of your slides, Ken?
I'll do that. Sure.
Okay, good. And I can include that, which is great. And so any parting words of inspiration for us all, Ken?
Well, sure. I just know that everyone, no matter where you are at in your practice, you may have some doubts, you may have some fears, you may have some ideas about what doesn't work. And whatever has happened up to this point in your history does not define what your destiny will be. You have unwritten pages ahead of yourself. You have an ability to create a possibility that's in line with what you would love. And that would be what I would encourage you to do. Not just what might be the next step, but what would be the practice that I would love? What would be the place I'd love to go to work every day? And then with that answer, that internal knowing about that, you just take the next logical step and you will be able to do it. You'll get all the resources you need as you stay aligned with that.
Awesome. Thanks again, Ken. Thanks everyone for your participation, your great questions, and we'll look forward to seeing you on our next webinar. Thanks again. Bye now.
Thanks, Joe. It was great to see you.
Okay. Bye-bye.
All right. Bye, everyone.